What is up, Steelers Nation? Thank you so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. I'm Noah Schreckbein, joined always by my man in the corner, producer Nick Belsky. Find us on youtube.com/All Steelers Talkers. Subscribe anywhere you get your podcast, the Pittsburgh Steelers. We are getting closer by the day to the 2024 NFL Draft, but there's some outside news, some reports that the team is, not done making moves prior to the draft just yet. We're going to dive into some real options, some different options, I think, that the Pittsburgh Steelers might have as the Brandon Ayuk conversation has somewhat died off, but the trade talk revolving the Pittsburgh Steelers and a wide receiver certainly has not. Meanwhile, a trade in the NFL draft is very real for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it comes if the board only falls a certain way for them. We're going to dive into what that trade could look like and what it would take for them to move up, not in the first round, but maybe later in the NFL draft. Plus, as always, we'll answer your questions. So make sure to drop those in the comments throughout the show. We appreciate everybody for jumping on. As we've been saying, go check out our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk clips for even more All Steelers Talk. It's a beautiful day in the Berg, Nick. I got to ask. Kenny Pickett took number 7. Nobody wants to hear about it, but man, my first thought was white Michael Vick. White Michael Vick. How you feeling, my friend? And what'd you think?
I'm feeling good. And honestly, when you look at Kenny Pickett and his rollout to the left, I know he's been sacked 95% of the time, but I mean, it's reminiscent, shades of Michael Vick. So he just did it in reverse. He went from Pittsburgh to Philly instead of going from Philly to Pittsburgh. So I think they're the same player.
It's pretty close. If Kenny Pickett could throw the football and was a lot more athletic and didn't get sacked as much, I could definitely see some hints of Michael Vick.
Maybe he needs to start throwing with his left hand. Maybe that was the problem all along.
That's true. Who knows? When I saw the number, I laughed. Steven he was the first one I saw with the meme of the white Madden Michael Vick, which I thought was absolutely hilarious. That aside, the Pittsburgh Steelers, they got some stuff going on. They're looking for a wide receiver still. Their reports as of right now say that it's not over. We thought it was over. We thought they've moved on from Brandon Ayuk. We thought they moved on from the Houston Texans possibilities. We thought that they were settling into the NFL draft, and this is where they're going, and there's not much more splash to come outside of Antonio Brown predicting that they're going to sign Justin Simmons, quote unquote, soon. Before we talk wide receivers, you starting to believe AB or what? How many things does he have to get right before we could actually believe him?
I don't know if there's a number for me. I don't know. He could get some things right, which I'm sure he still does have contacts in the NFL world, but at any given day, I don't trust what's coming from that account. I don't. And if he gets it right, good on him, and that's great. Yes. I'll give him his flowers when he gets it right, but I'm never going to look at what he says and take it at face value. There's been too much else around besides those 3 or 4 correct predictions for me to actually take CTESPN as a credible source.
I agree, but once in a while he tossed the Justin Fields thing out there months, and I think it was just a shot in the dark, but it worked. People are starting to believe him. Another name that I think Pittsburgh Steelers fans have an iffy relationship with is Jason La Canfora, who loves to talk his smack on the Pittsburgh Steelers, loves to take his digs when it comes to this football team, but at the same time always has a little bit of insight. And this time he says that there's another move coming. On the In the Huddle podcast, he said, quote, "For me, there's a piece of information we don't have yet, which is, do they trade for a wide receiver before the draft? It would not surprise me if they did that tomorrow, if they did the Wednesday before the draft, if they did it while they were on the clock, if they did it in the run up to the draft that Thursday. I know that they're really trying to make something happen here." We were looking at it as of right now, where the Pittsburgh Steelers were moving on from their wide receiver trades, that Brandon Ayuk was in the rearview mirror, that, thoughts of John Mechie and Noah Brown and all those names that we were tossing out there seemingly died off. Not anymore. It appears that the Pittsburgh Steelers are still hunting for a wide receiver. Jerry Dulac said it the other day that, there is another move maybe of some significance coming for the Pittsburgh Steelers. So it's really just the question of who are they looking for and who are they going to get, and is it going to be a Brandon Ayuk? Has that ship sailed, or is it going to be another name? I got a list. I think obviously you got to start with the two that we've mentioned already, which is Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins. But I got other names that I think are just as interesting, if not more interesting, for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Do you still put Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins on a list of possibilities, or do you just look at it and say that ship has sailed? Let's come up with some other options, and I have some other options for you.
I feel like the price for those guys has just continued to remain steady, because if the price was reasonable, why wouldn't the Steelers have already gone out and done it? I mean, you look at the receiver core that the Steelers have, they have a clear need to bring in a number 2 or a number 1 that is 1A, 1B with George Pickens. So if the price was reasonable, you'd have to imagine the Steelers would have already pulled the trigger on a trade like that. And you'd have to imagine that they have already talked to those teams, Cincinnati and San Francisco, respectively, about what those prices could be. So it doesn't feel to me like that's something in the realm of possibility. It'd be great because both of those receivers are tremendously talented.
Yes.
But at the same time, we've gotten to a point with those names where it seems like they are the cream of the crop who's potentially available, but it doesn't seem like something that the Steelers can afford, or the other teams are willing to lower their price for the Steelers to be able to afford.
Yeah, I agree. And I think both guys come up with massive contracts. I think that's the difference here. Is there are a lot of names, and I'm going to toss out a couple of names that I don't think are as expensive long-term as Brandon Ayuk and T. Higgins. Whereas, and I think those guys, you're going to have to trade a boatload of picks and compensation. And then at the same time, you're going to have to sign them to a long-term deal that the Pittsburgh Steelers just frankly can't afford. Right now, if this was Kenny Pickett's team, if this was Kenny Pickett and he's got another 2 years on his rookie deal, maybe another 3 years on his rookie deal, 2, I guess this is season, no, 3. So he'd have possibly 3 more seasons on his rookie deal. You got room to work with. You don't have that same room to work with knowing that Justin Fields and Russell Wilson are both free agents next season, and you got to figure out your quarterback position. Maybe that's a rookie and maybe that solves things. Maybe that's a cheap deal for Justin Fields. Maybe that's a massive deal for Russell Wilson or Justin Fields. You don't know yet, so you can't make those moves. I agree with you. I think both of those names are behind us at this point. I don't see either of them coming to Pittsburgh. I will give you a couple that I think could end up in Pittsburgh. We've obviously talked about John Mechie. I'm not ruling John Mechie out. I think that makes too much sense. I think that the Steelers are going to look at it and say that's a guy with a lot of upside. And I'm not saying he's their first option. I'm not even saying he's their second option. I'm just saying he's probably on a list of possibilities when they're thinking, hey, look, we want to make a trade. Why not go get John Mechie? If things aren't working out, if the rest of these people on this list do not work in their favor, I could see Mechie being a last resort. I'm going to toss 3 more names out here. Let me hear what one you think probably the most realistic. Davante Adams, that we have talked about a number of times. I mean, the Raiders are trending upwards, I guess, with Antonio Pierce, but they still have a lot of questions. If they don't get a quarterback, is Aiden O'Connell still their only quarterback over in Vegas? I'm not totally sold that he's looking to just finish his career on a really bad team. Maybe he wants to come over to Pittsburgh. Maybe he wants to play with the Justin Fields or Russell Wilson. I'm sure he wants to play with Mike Tomlin. I could see Davante Adams being on that list. Courtland Sutton's another name. Denver is cleaning house. They could care less. Sean Payton is in, I want my team. Nobody here was my team. Get rid of them all mode, which I respect. That happens all the time when coaches come in here, especially coaches with as much pressure and have to redo as much as Sean Payton has to redo. I could see Courtland Sutton being a name to watch, although that one injury written, it kind of plays the same game as George Pickens a little bit. Could be an iffy one, but I think that he's an option. Has a relationship with Russell Wilson, obviously. They played together in his 2 years with Russ. He had 829 yards, which is his second best season, and 772 yards with 10 touchdowns last season. Not a bad name to have there, especially if he's got a good relationship with your quarterback. And then Tyler Lockett, who also has a relationship with good old Russell Wilson, who during their time together, I mean, he put up some numbers. He was a dude who caught every single football. Came out of nowhere. He was the underdog story. Tyler Lockett was a dude to watch. Him, Davante Adams, both 31 years old, which is old, but not super old for a wide receiver. I don't know. You hear those 3 names. Am I crazy on all of them, or do any of them make some kind of sense?
Well, you got 2 former teammates of Russell Wilson, so I think right there you do have the connection. And Davante Adams, there's some smoke there with him in Las Vegas, because not only is it, Antonio Pierce's team, not only is it a team that right now doesn't really have a quarterback, it's a team that when Davante Adams initially went to Vegas, he was going to rejoin Derek Carr. He was going to rejoin his college quarterback. And when Carr left, the question was, well, how is Davante Adams going to deal with this? And he dealt with it. He's a professional. And I think that says a lot about him. But if you look at what he's been able to do, even at 31 years old, 4 straight seasons of over 100 receptions and over 1,000 yards, not to mention double digits in touchdowns in 3 of those last 4. And in 5 of the last 6, he has the triple digits in catches and obviously 1,000 yards receiving. The dude is a beast. The dude is a technician. He is still one of the best in the league. And if it wasn't for him playing on a horrible team in the Las Vegas Raiders, a lot more people would be talking about Davante Adams as a potential trade piece. The only problem I have with him is that contract. And it's the same with all of these guys. I mean, Courtland Sutton, we saw somebody earlier in the comments here, Thomas, saying it's like a $15 million cap hit for Courtland Sutton. Davante Adams, I think his cap hit is somewhere around $25 million. So again, it's a lot of money for a lot of these receivers, but when it comes to what you'd get back on the field, Adams is 100% worth it. Lockett to me is 100% worth it, especially for the change of pace that he would bring in a receiver core with a guy like George Pickens and what he could do for a guy like Calvin Austin, another undersized guy that can play the X. I think that would be huge. So all 3 of these names make sense to me. Whether or not the Penguins, Jesus, I got to switch gears here. I just came off of that one. Whether or not the Steelers can afford it is another question.
So let me ask this. Can you look up Davante Adams and could you look up all 3 of these contracts? Davante Adams, Tyler Lockett, Courtland Sutton. I want to know how many years are left on all of them. Because if it's Davante Adams for 1 year, I don't think his trade value is incredibly high. I don't think you're looking at Davante Adams giving up a first-round pick. Maybe you're giving up a second-round pick. But I think the Stephon Diggs trade kind of set the stone there where it's like, this guy's he's younger. He's probably just as productive. Maybe Davante Adams could go for an early third and you have 2 thirds, so maybe a third and something. I could see that working out. If his contract is only maybe a 1 year, maybe a 2 year contract where you're not giving up a boatload of time and a boatload of money. The other 2, Courtland Sutton, I believe, is entering the final year of his deal, $15 million, which is not terribly expensive. Like, you got to remember that. I get it. $15 million is a lot of money for a wide receiver. That's what you were going to pay Deontay Johnson. Why wouldn't you pay that to another guy? There's a massive difference between Brandon Ayuk making $30 million a year and Courtland Sutton making $15 million a year, especially if it's a shorter term deal. And then there's no way Tyler Lockett's making a boatload of money.
So you have Courtland Sutton, who has this year and next on his contract at a little over $17 million as far as a cap hit. Tyler Lockett.
What was that? A little over how many?
17. About 17.3 right now. Tyler Lockett's contract, he has an out after this season, but he has another year after this that goes up to $30 million if you don't take that out.
Yeah, no chance.
So no chance that the Steelers would pick that up. And then Davante Adams, same thing. He has $25 million cap hit this year, potential out after the year. But if you hold on to him, it's $44 million cap hit for the next 2 seasons after that.
Yeah, that'll never happen either. So that's what I'm saying. I think that you could make a deal with the Raiders. I think you could call the Las Vegas Raiders and say, hey, look, we want Davante Adams. We'll give you a 3rd-round pick, and we'll take that cap hit. You get an out. You restructure that contract. You got Davante Adams for another 2 years on a reasonably priced deal. This is what I mean by this. Davante Adams is a guy that at this point in his career has made a boatload of money. And I'm not trying to speak for him because I'm always pro player. Go get your bag. You're only here for a limited amount of time. Go make some money. I wouldn't be surprised if Davante Adams wants to come to a team that he could win a Super Bowl on. And then when he sees that he could win a Super Bowl on that team, why not try and just stick it out and win more Super Bowls? I think you could look at Davante Adams and say that's a dude who's going to come and maybe he signs for $20 million a season after this year for, 2 more years. And then he could see where he goes from there. Maybe just a 1 year, $18 to $20 million deal, almost fully guaranteed. I'd be open to that too. I think there's a massive difference between $20 and $30 million. What you can do with that $10 million is your entire NFL draft class. You can sign your entire draft class in that $10 million. You could work it out, and the Steelers always love to work it out, where you can make some of this a signing bonus, and you don't got to take it on. As Cody mentions in the chat, chances are when you make a trade, you don't take on all that salary cap. You're going to work that out in the trade. So the Steelers aren't going to take a major hit with some of these guys. That's the difference. Like Brandon Ayuk is a long-term, this is a lot of money moving forward. T. Higgins this is a lot of money moving forward, not necessarily right now. The other guys, I think it's reverse. It's, this is a decent chunk of change today. It's not as much change tomorrow. And I think you can make that work. Tyler Lockett at $30 million is insane. I'd remove that name from the list right this very second, just because there's no chance that I'm paying Tyler Lockett $30 million. Like it's not going to happen. Cortland Sutton for 17. I think you could rework that deal, extend him for another year or two and lower that to 15, maybe $14 million with the good signing bonus so that he's getting a lot of that guaranteed up front. I don't think he'd be opposed to that. And I think Denver take on a lot of that hit as well because they're just looking to get rid of some money. I could see that one working out too. Davante Adams is the name that I'd say watch. I'd say I'm not ruling out a Davante Adams trade as we sit here right now. I think that Davante Adams is a dude who makes a lot of sense for his price tag right now, has an out next season, and you could figure that out. Omar Khan could come in here. There could be an understanding where if we're not giving up a bunch, I think it could work in their favor. I don't know. Out of those three, you had to pick who's most realistic.
The most realistic I was going to say Lockett, but seeing that $30 million cap hit, I know you can make it work around, but that's starting from there with the Tyler Lockett is, like you said, I'm going to strike that off the list, or at the very least, move it down the list a couple of pegs. But it honestly, and it's kind of weird to say, Davante Adams seems like the most realistic.
Yes, I agree. I think that he's a guy he can work out so well in Pittsburgh, and they're probably looking for the same things. And he could come in here and mentor George Pickens and Calvin Austin and whoever the rookie wide receivers. Why not? Why not make that trade?
It's an interesting dynamic, and it's an interesting mindset shift because you look back last year, the year before that, it was, all right, the Steelers are going young on offense. They're building for the future. They're trying to build something sustainable. And all of a sudden, you're going for it this year. And it's like almost like the LA Rams, maybe not to that extent, because they said, screw them kids. But the Steelers are at a point now where they're saying it's about this year. It's about right now. And they're going for it. So maybe with that shift in mindset, that leads towards them going after a Davante Adams or them going after somebody who will not only come in here and bring his talent, but we talked about his professionalism and how he handled the Derek Carr situation. That would help in spades for a guy like George Pickens.
Yep. He's got everything you're looking for. I think that's a massive move for the Pittsburgh Steelers. If you could, just think about it the way exactly how you just laid it out there. The Steelers are looking for a Super Bowl right now. This is no longer a waiting situation. The Steelers want to win. They want to win today. You'd give up a third-round pick for a win today. You'd give up a third-round pick for Davante Adams, even if you knew you were just going to get him for a year. You'd feel comfortable doing that. If it was a first-round pick, you wouldn't. If it was a second-round pick, you'd say, that's iffy. A third-round pick, I'm giving it up, and I'm saying, yep, sounds good. It's fine. It's no big deal. We're going to try to win a Super Bowl right now, and we think that's our best opportunity to do so. And then hopefully you could still draft somebody, and you're in a really good spot if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. There's a couple of questions about wide receivers. Want to answer those, but first, Michael's got some good ones, so I appreciate him, as always. If you could only choose one, who would you rather? The Steelers draft 2 wide receivers, a slot and an outside, or 2 defensive backs, a slot and an outside? I'm going to say 2 defensive backs, if we're going to be honest. But I think a lot of that plays into where you draft. I think in an ideal world, if the Steelers can get Terrion Arnold or Cooper DeJean and Max Melton, that's as good as it gets right there. That's phenomenal. That's your future. You got minimal worries. Great. I think in a realistic world where you're looking at where this draft falls, if you can get a Xavier Legette and a Ricky Pearsall, you're in a really good spot. That's a much better addition than the cornerback that you're going to get in the end of the 3rd round or the beginning of the 4th round compared to what you're going to get at corner. So if I had to choose realistically, wide receiver in an ideal world, hands down corner. I just think that you could find wide receivers everywhere, every year. It's tough to find corners. It's always tough to find. Even the great corners don't always work out. So it's tough to find some really, really good corners. And this draft class has some guys that you feel really, really confident it's going to work out. Follow-up question here. Who would you rather? Mike, I'm terrible with names. I'm going to go. Oh, wow. This is actually a really, really tough one. This is a really, really tough one. I think I'm going to go Malachi Corley and Xavier Legette. I think that those two have way more upside. I like both of these defensive backs. I want to call them corners, but I don't think they're both going to work out as corners. In Sainristil still, Mike Sainristil still. Am I saying that correctly? Kyrie Jackson. Go ahead.
I was gonna say Sandra still.
Yeah,
maybe I don't know. We'll go with either one of those.
I'm so bad with names; it's awful. Even if I watch a football game and they say the name, I'm still terrible with it. I think both of these guys might end up being. I think Kyrie Jackson especially might end up being a safety, a good safety, but I think he's physical enough that that's where he's going to play. Corley and Legette, I think, are both going to be studs in the NFL. I'm going with both of those guys. I think the talent there is unbelievable, and the upside there is very undervalued. So I'm going with both of those guys. Feeling really, really, really good about it. While we kind of collect ourselves with some questions here, because I think there's a lot of them in here, let's talk about the center trade. The other day, or yesterday, I guess, Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette tossed out there that the Pittsburgh Steelers could make a trade in the NFL draft, but it won't be in the first round. It'll only be in the second round, and they'll go from 51 to however far up they need to go get a center. And that would be the only way that they did it. If the Steelers said, hey, look, we didn't get our guy in the first round, so let's go get him in the second round, and we're no longer waiting. And to be totally honest, I could see that happening, and that's the only way that I see the Pittsburgh Steelers trading up in this NFL draft, is if they do not select a center in the first round, but they still need a center in the second round. The Steelers, in my eyes, are getting a starting center in the NFL draft. There are no questions to it. It's going to happen. You could try to talk yourself out of it, or try to talk yourself into Nate Herbig, or try to talk yourself into Connor Williams, or whoever. Chances are they're going to get a center in the NFL draft, and he's going to be their starter, and they're not going to miss out on it. Luckily, guys like Graham Barton, Jackson Powers-Johnson, Cedric Van Pran, and Zach Frazier are all kind of falling as we sit here right now. So you could look at it and say this is working out very well for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm not ruling out that they draft a center in the first round. I mean, I put out my mock draft on Tuesday, and I have Graham Barton going at pick 20, and I feel really good about Graham Barton going at pick 20. I saw yesterday from Daniel Jeremiah that Armarius Mims might fall to the second round. Things are going to shake out so differently over the next 2 weeks that we don't know how the draft board is exactly going to look. But I'm going to tell you that Graham Barton's value is going to remain there. So is guys like Zach Frazier and Jackson Powers-Johnson, but it's all going to remain right on that 20 to maybe the 15th pick in the second round area. And I think the Steelers are going to say, hey, look, depending on who's there in the first round, I think this is how this works out. Depending on who's there in the first round, if it's a corner, Terrion Arnold, Nate Wiggins, the Cooper DeJean, if it's a tackle, Mims, maybe Tyler Guyton, maybe, I don't know, Troy Fautanu. Thank you. If for some reason one of those top 3 tackles falls to Pittsburgh at 20, I could see them go in that direction. If they're sitting there and they're saying, look at our options are Kool-Aid McKinstry, a couple of wide receivers, or Graham Barton, they're going with Graham Barton. They're not going to wait it out. You know, there's no point in saying, hey, let's go and trade up in the second round to get the guy that was there in the first round. Why would you do that? There's nobody there in the first round that's worth the first round pick as much as this center class is. And people try to say like, oh, you got to get value. I don't understand when we lost value for a center. I don't understand at what point in the offseason people stopped realizing how desperately the Pittsburgh Steelers need a center. Like, it's not like it went away. If this team had a bunch of needs, I could see it. But they don't have a bunch of needs. They're not sitting here with like 10 needs where they're like, well, they got to draft all these positions. You can narrow it down to 4, and one of them you could get anywhere in the draft. And that is cornerback, offensive tackle, center, and wide receiver. You could get a center, or you could get a wide receiver anywhere in this draft, and you could expect him to contribute to your offense. If the Steelers make a trade for a wide receiver, that completely erases it from their mind in the first round. a cornerback, you need a corner, but again, you could get a corner in the second round or the third round, and you can feel comfortable that they're playing a backup role for the Steelers in 2024. Center and tackle are your only ones, and you could fill both of those. Your team is exactly where you want it to be. If you could get a center, if you could get, I mean, people weren't making fun of, and they were criticizing Marquise Pouncey, and it took 1 year before everybody was like, oh, okay, yeah, never mind. This is the right move. This is the right call. If you could get a center, if you could get your center, your long-term franchise center, you get him. You don't think about when you get him, you just get him. And I could see it. If they don't get it in the first round, if there are other options, that's the only way they trade up, in my opinion, and apparently in Jerry Dulac's opinion, as if they're there and they say, hey, look, we're going on Marius Mims in the first round, I could see them going with the center in the second. How far do you think they got to trade up? You think they're going, I don't know, second round, top 10 pick?
See, if you would have asked me this 3 or 4 weeks ago, the way that people were talking about Zach Frazier, the way that people were still talking at that point about Cedric Van Pran, the way that people were talking about Jackson Powers Johnson being a top 15 pick in the NFL draft, then I would say, yeah, they probably got to move up into the top 10, into the very early second round to be able to get one of those top 4 guys. But every center has started to drop, and that positional value thing is something that NFL GMs look at. They look at the center position. They say, well, is a center more expensive than a left tackle, or do we want a tackle who's an expensive position to be here on a rookie deal for the next 4? And then we'll go out and get a center later in the draft. And I feel like a lot of teams are going to take that approach. So I feel like if you get up into maybe the mid-second round, you can definitely get one of the top 3. I think, as we've talked about, Van Pran is dropping and dropping and dropping. And as you've talked about, I think off air, you're not a big fan anyway.
Nope.
But you might not get a Barton, but the way that Jackson Powers Johnson is dropping and the way that everybody was in love with him, and there was a chasm between him and the rest of the center class, and the fact that that's disappeared, and in fact gone the other way with Graham Barton being now projected to go at 20 by a lot of people, I think you can move up. If you're at 20th pick, 51 in the second round, if you move up maybe 7 spots, you might be able to get one of Frazier or Powers Johnson, depending on how the board falls.
Yeah, look at, I agree. And I think that you could feel comfortable with either of them. I think there's a dip between Barton and the rest of them. I do. And Jackson Powers Johnson concerns me, but I think that they're all there, and I think that they're all capable. And I think the Steelers would be comfortable with any of the 3 to say, hey, yeah, sounds good. And now there's stuff coming out where like Jackson Powers Johnson's medicals might not be great. Maybe he's going to slide because of that. If that's the truth, I mean, that I'm all for it. Like, you want to wait it out. You want to get a guy that teams don't want to take a risk on for one reason or another. And you did your own medicals on him. You brought him in for a pre-draft visit and you feel really good about it. Whatever. Who cares? Who cares? I look at that all the time. There's always these reports of, oh, this guy's got medical issues. This guy's got medical issues. Your doctors tell you exactly what's wrong with these guys. Your doctors checked them out and said, your medical staff knows exactly how long they're going to last in the NFL and exactly how long their body's going to hold up. And they're going to give you a detailed report. And if you feel confident that you just got a guy, no issues, go get a guy that, and I think that helps their case. But I could see mid second round, definitely, depending on how quickly Barton goes. If Barton goes immediately after the Steelers, but before the end of the first round, I think you got to make a move a little bit earlier. But I think that if they all go into day 2, the Steelers have a whole day to rework it, not only just come up with a trade package, but also talk to other teams and see where they're going, because that's the second part of this is you have a whole 24 hours to call everybody and say, hey, look, are you going to take a center? And teams are going to be honest. Like, that's the thing is GMs are honest with each other. They're obviously trying to negotiate, but they're trying to, they're only trying to negotiate in a smart way. Omar Khan's real quick, boom, 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 on the phone, off the phone. They just want to know, hey, look, how far up do we have to go get a center? And even if that team's not going to tell them, the teams around them are going to tell them. The teams in their division are going to tell them. They're going to have the insight to know who is a threat to taking their options. And I think that gives them enough time to go into round 2 and say, yeah, let's get a guy. Good.
Real quick, 2 things on what you just said, because I think we had lessons and examples from last year's draft. 1, yes, the Steelers know who they need to pass to get certain players. They did it last year in the first round. They knew Broderick Jones was not making it past the New England Patriots. And you know who they traded with? The New York Jets to get him. So they knew who they needed to go to and where they needed to go to get Broderick Jones. So they have a keen understanding of where they need to go. And secondly, with the medicals, that's exactly why Darnell Washington fell last year. And who ended up picking him? The Pittsburgh Steelers, because they were confident enough in his medicals that, hey, if he falls to this point, we're going to take him anyway because we think the upside is worth it. So the same thing could happen with a guy like Jackson Powers Johnson, where he begins to fall. And then the Steelers say, you know what? It's worth it at this point. If he makes it to 51, it's 100% worth it. But if he makes it to a certain point and they say, can we trade up to get this guy? I think they'll have that number in their head going into the draft. And I think that's why he should still be on the board.
Yeah. Look at, I could agree. And again, you're going to know, I think Darnell Washington, there's some iffiness there.
Yeah.
I think there's some real concern that his career is not going to last very long, but I think the Steelers knew exactly how long they were going to get him for, and they knew exactly what they needed to do with him. And exactly, he fell. Not every team's looking to take that risk, and the Steelers might not be looking to take that risk if it's serious enough and with a position that's probably more valuable to them, like center. But if they're not, and other teams are freaking out and they're saying, oh, well, you know what? Cedric Van Pran is healthy. We're going to go with him. The Steelers might get lucky. I agree. I think that's the way to go. All right. There's a center question here before we dive into the rest of these questions here.
We do. We have, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Who do you like the most out of the centers in this draft class? I like Graham Barton. I think he's an athletic freak. I think he tested like an athletic freak. I think he's a dude that you have to look at if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers. Any team with the center, he's my top center. I just think that he's going to be able to do everything. He's got versatility, which I think always helps, just in case, he's not the starter in year one. He could be your guy. But I love Graham Barton in this draft class. And then there was another one here I saw about Zach Frazier and the pros and cons. Yeah.
We got this one from William. He says, in your point of view, what are the pros and cons of Zach Frazier being drafted by the Pittsburgh Steelers?
I mean, I think the pros are that this dude's a complete center. He could pass block. He could run block. He's an animal. He was the leader of that offensive line for West Virginia. I was a big Zach Frazier fan coming out of college, even before the broken leg. And I think that, just hearing him say, like, dude, it's whatever, kind of gave me like the Mountaineer, like, this guy just rubbed some dirt on it. He got back on the field. It's no big deal. I'm a big Zach Frazier fan. I think the pros are that he's complete and ready to start. I think the cons, I'm not totally sure what the cons are. I think the biggest cons are just that he doesn't match up athletically compared to Graham Barton or Jackson Powers Johnson. That's the biggest things. And that's why he's not ahead, of either of them, is just because those two have him beat physically or athletically, and people are going to look for that. It's an evolving game. It's getting a lot faster. Guys throw the football a lot more. But you look at guys like Creed Humphrey. You look at guys like, I don't know, I almost said Jason Kelce, but he's the wrong answer. He's super athletic. You look at, like, Creed Humphrey is a good example. Creed Humphrey's athletic, but he's a powerhouse. That dude is going to run you over. And I think there's value there. And I think you could look at that and say that's the way that centers could still make a lot of noise in the NFL and still make a major impact. I'm a big Zach Frazier guy. I don't think there's many cons. I think he just doesn't stack up athletically compared to the other two.
We did have one more center question before we go back into the wide receiver questions, because we got a whole handful of those. Dyron's House says, why is Cedric Van Pran not the number one center? I just don't get it.
Look, it's just everything. It's across the board. And I think Cedric Van Pran is going to get drafted, and I think he's going to get an opportunity, and maybe I'm wrong. But I think that athletically, he doesn't hold up to Graham Barton or Jackson Powers Johnson. He probably edges Zach Frazier. Physically, when you're just looking at strength and power, I don't think he matches up to any of them. I don't think technique-wise he matches up to any of them. I think he's really good, and he comes from Georgia, and he's got that edge, and he played on a really good team, and I think that all helps. I think he's got all the makings of an NFL center. I just don't see anything in his game that really, like, flashes, because that's the biggest thing is you look at Graham Barton and Jackson Powers Johnson, and you just see pure dominance in their tape. You just go, holy crap, these guys are nuts. Like, I can't believe this. Zach Frazier is a dude he's gonna hit you, and he's gonna play mean, and you could see it in his tape. Van Pran is a dude who, I mean, you see his tape and you say that's a good center, but that's it. You just say that's a good center. There's nothing that explodes that says this is the dude. You got to stick with the dude. I think just in a normal center class, he's much higher on the board. In this year's center class, he's fourth, and I think that's where he fits.
Let's move over to some wide receiver questions. Brandon Davis had a couple about one particular former Steeler. First says, hey, bring Chase Claypool home. What are your thoughts? And then goes on to say, would you consider bringing him back for nothing on a one-year prove-it deal?
I would say no to both. I would believe that Chase Claypool left for a reason. He wasn't. I could tell you this. There were some people who were upset that Chase Claypool left. There were others who could really care less that Chase Claypool left in the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room. I don't think that he was as big of a problem, I think, as some people want to make him seem, especially in comparison to some other guys that the Pittsburgh Steelers have had and currently have. But I still think that the team looked at him as more of an issue than a solution. He did not develop the way that they hoped. I don't think that he put in the effort the way that they hoped that he would. I mean, this guy's got all the physical tools to be a complete and just dominant player in the NFL, and he just doesn't turn out to be that. And I think that's where he's at this point in his career. I think somebody gives him a shot, but I don't see. I mean, I look at again, I'm pro player. I hope he turns it around. I think Chase was very nice to me when he was here, and I got a lot of respect for him, but I don't think that he's a dude that the Steelers are looking at as an answer.
Teeman has a question, says, I've heard people mention Tyler Lockett, somebody we talked about earlier in the episode, but what about DK Metcalf? Do you think the Seattle Seahawks would be willing to part with their freak of nature up there in Seattle?
Will you look up his contract, his current contract? He's 26 years old. He's coming off of back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Really good player, obviously. Dude's a freak of nature. He's probably the scariest human being in the NFL now that Aaron Donald has retired. I mean, look at DK Metcalf on paper is insane. And I don't know what his money's worth. I'm sure that it's a boatload of money. Yeah, what is it?
Right now, his cap hit is $24 million. With an out after this season, it'd turn into $29.5 million next year if the Steelers just kept going with it.
Look at $29 million isn't even overpaying for DK Metcalf. That's a fair contract, but I think that's the issue. Is that's a fair contract, and you're going to have to continue to pay that guy that kind of money. And on top of that, I think DK Metcalf goes backwards to the philosophy that the Steelers have had throughout this offseason, and that is we're getting rid of the problems. We're not looking for any issues in our locker room or on the field moving forward. I don't think DK Metcalf is a dude who keeps his cool on the field. I mean, his penalties kind of show that. You could watch highlight tapes of this guy just bullying people around after the play because he just can't keep a cool head. And again, I get it. You're playing football. It's a hostile sport. There are a lot of emotions. DK Metcalf, I don't think fits what the Steelers are looking for in that kind of veteran receiver. I also think it's an issue when it comes to George Pickens. I'd be very concerned about what George Pickens turns into with DK Metcalf as his mentor. I don't think DK is a guy that realistically they would consider.
Thomas has an out-of-the-box idea here for the Steelers offense. Says, how about Pat Freiermuth out wide and Darnell Washington taking more tight end one snaps?
So I think Pat Freiermuth will play a lot more in that slot role. I think Connor Hayward will too. I think both of those guys are going to take pretty big steps forward in the Steelers offense this year, especially after last season. Darnell, I could see being utilized more. My issue with Darnell is again, like, how long could he hold up in a season playing extended reps? Can he last a whole year on that knee playing almost every down or pretty close to every down of an offense? I'm very concerned about that. I'll tell you this. I'm not going to rule out the Steelers adding a tight end in the NFL draft. I'm just not. I think that it's a possibility. I think Pat Freiermuth's on the last year of his rookie deal. Connor Hayward is probably more of a backfield fullback / slot receiver gadget guy. And Darnell Washington's got injury issues. So you look at that combination, and I wouldn't rule out them adding somebody. And I think they've done enough homework to say maybe that's a possibility. I could see Pat being more of a slot Travis Kelce type guy and Connor Hayward doing the same thing, and then utilizing, if it's not Darnell Washington, somebody else as that primary on the line tight end.
We have two more questions here, one about a receiver, one about a quarterback, which we'll close out the show with. But Manny asks, we've talked about a lot of receivers in this episode. Which receiver do you think the Steelers should get, and who would be the best fit? We've talked about probably half dozen or more today of those names, or of anybody that you've seen out there. Who's the best fit for the Steelers right now?
Yeah, so I'll give you one trade and one draft because I don't know if he missed the start of the show. Davante Adams is my go-to in the trade. I think that makes the most sense for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think that you could work his contract to a way that helps you. I think professionally, he's the perfect fit to help mentor George Pickens and move along Calvin Austin, plus whoever you bring in the NFL draft. He's a superstar right off the bat. I don't think he's going to cost you a boatload when it comes to trade package. I think you could get him for a third-round pick, maybe a third and something later. I could see Davante Adams being way too perfect for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And I could also see the Steelers saying, yeah, let's go make that happen. Let's work some stuff out. And the Raiders kind of realizing like, yeah, we don't have a quarterback. Let's see if we could kind of add more pieces and move forward and save some money in the meantime. When it comes to the NFL draft, I think their best fit is Ladd McConkey. I'd say Roman Wilson is a pretty close second, but those are realistic options. Those are like real second, third round options that I think the Steelers could go after. I think Malachi Corley's on that list too. When it comes to the first round, I think Adonai Mitchell is the dude that I'm leaning towards very heavily. I think he fits what the Steelers want. I think he could play both outside and inside. He's real twitchy. He's great when it comes to his routes. He's a deep threat and a middle of the field guy. All around package, I think very undervalued. I would say that would be my pick. And later rounds would be those three: Wilson, McConkey, Corley.
Like I said, we have a quarterback question here from Still Cold. Will the Steelers draft a quarterback knowing both QBs currently signed are for only 1 year?
Will the Steelers draft? I'm not going to say no. I'm not. I won't lie to you. When I was going through my mock draft on Tuesday, I sat there for a while trying to come up with 6th round pick. If Joe Milton's here, are you going with Joe Milton? I think that's where they would draft somebody is late. One of those 6th round picks. That's what you're going to get. It's not going to be anybody sooner. They're not even going to consider anybody sooner. They haven't even scouted anybody sooner. It's those end of the draft possible options. Joe Milton would be the name that I think they favor. He's the only one that I think would be like a real option if they were going to draft somebody. Otherwise, I think they might sign somebody as an undrafted free agent and see what happens. But I don't think the 1-year deal kind of concerns them just because they have options in Justin Fields. They could look to extend Russ after the season. They could go into next year's draft and make a move and say, we're going to go get a quarterback. The rest of our team's looking real good. We're going to go get a quarterback. I don't think they worry about that until next year. If I was going to say they were going to draft a quarterback, it'd probably be in the sixth round.
We got a couple quick ones here that came in right under the gun. Brandon Davis says, any thoughts on where the Steelers are with Pat Freiermuth contract and Najee's 5th-year option? Because that is coming real quick.
It is coming real quick. Every time I ask, and I'm always the guy, you could go back through all those press conferences, and I'm always the guy, hey, what's going on with Najee's 5th-year option? And Omar's just like, we have till May 5th. And I'm like, I know that. You told me that last time. Can we get something else here? Don't seem to want to give an answer. I'm getting weary that they're going to pick up Najee Harris's 5th-year option. I think that they could probably sign him for less if he doesn't have a big year. I think Jaylen Warren plays a factor there. I think that the NFL draft could have a surprising running back coming to Pittsburgh. I could see them avoiding that and trying to handle that next year instead. I'm not gonna predict that they get it. I think that they decline his 5th-year option, head into the season, and try to figure that out next year. When it comes to Pat Freiermuth's contract, I don't know. I'm having a tough time with that one because he didn't put up the numbers last year to warrant a hold in this year. He's got to go out there and ball out this year, dealt with injuries last year. There's just nothing to say, hey, we're going to sign him to a long-term deal now. I think the Steelers want to get a deal done. I believe that is on their mind, is to get a deal done. They like Pat a lot, but I don't know if it's going to happen this year or next year. I would imagine that if it is this year, it's going to be like right at the beginning of training camp. If it's I'm not saying that he's gone after the season. I just think that both sides kind of want a full year of production with a good quarterback and a good offensive coordinator before they make that decision.
Steelers do like signing those contracts in Latrobe. I will say that.
Oh, they do. They do.
We got one last one here from Kurt. Says, must be missing something. Have the Steelers reported that Darnell Washington has a knee issue?
So I wanted to address this one, Kurt. This is a good question. There's been no reports from the Steelers directly, but everybody kind of knows his medicals were real rough coming into the NFL draft. And then there have been reports from the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and other insiders in Pittsburgh who have kind of talked about, yeah, the Steelers have an understanding that Darnell Washington might only be a 4-year guy in the NFL before things start going awry. I don't know. I think it's a guess. I think it's a shot in the dark. You're kind of hoping for the best, but you have no idea what's going to happen. The fact that he missed a couple of practices last year pretty consistently and had the knee brace on, and he's got those really bad medicals. It's concerning. Everything adding up is concerning. I hope him nothing, but I hope it lasts forever. I hope he could play in the NFL for 15 years. But there are reports and speculations that the Steelers might only have this guy for a short amount of time.
That closes it out for us today.
My man, I appreciate everybody for answering. This was a good one. This was a good set of questions. It felt good to not talk about the same things we've talked about for months. We're getting so close, people. We're getting so close to some actual football. We're weeks away from the draft, and right after that, mini camp, OTAs. We're so close. With that said, we're heading out of here. Thank you guys so much for jumping on to another episode of All Steelers Talk. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts. And as always, find all of our work at allsteelers.com and check out our new YouTube channel, youtube.com/All Steelers Talk clips for even more All Steelers Talk. We will be back tomorrow to close out the week. Have another beautiful day in the Berg. Peace.